Good morning, Spartans. Welcome back. Happy Monday, May 9th. As I told you last week, I am out of the building today and Wednesday all day. I'll have all day golf tournaments those two days. I will be in the building tomorrow, Tuesday, May 10th in the morning, but I will miss hours 4 and 5 again for another competition. So if you are looking to make up any work or redo any tests, I guess more specifically, my availability will be Tuesday morning um, and Thursday and Friday mornings. I will not have any time after school this week. I will be available for periods 6 and 7 on Thursday and Friday. Uh, Tuesday morning, Thursday, Friday morning, Thursday, Friday hours 6 and 7. Those are my free periods. Trying to cram something in hours 1 through 5 when I have other classes is not going to work this week, especially as I try to get my other classes caught up since, for some of them, I'm missing all 3 days. Today, we'll talk about the Russian Revolution, some information to review, some new information to cover since our book is kind of touch disorganized. We'll talk Russian Revolution in regards to World War I, and then you have the next couple of sections, or next section to read, excuse me, on chapter 27. This is the 14 points, the conclusion of World War I. The entire reading guide, the entire chapter 7 reading guide will be turned in on Wednesday this week, Wednesday, May 11th. So just keep that in mind. And again, if you did your map on paper, if you printed it off and did it by hand, just make sure you take a picture, upload that into your Google Drive, and then you should be able to add it into the Word document. But we can look at that on Tuesday and Thursday when I'm back in. But chapter 27 reading guide will be due on Wednesday this week. So without any further ado, let's get cracking at it. Russian Revolution. Let's just make sure we have some economic understanding here, just in case for whatever reason, as juniors in high school, we don't know the difference between socialism, capitalism, and communism. I don't think you need to write these down. Should be pretty straightforward. All right. But in the capitalist society, in the capitalist economic and or political system, it is a system in which the country's industries are controlled by private owners. Nothing is regulated by the government. Ford charges what it charges. Snickers charges what it charges. People make the decision on how much they want to buy, what they want to buy it for. There is nothing governed by the government when it comes to economic decisions. Things are bought and sold for prices and quantities left up to the individual people and the individual business. An example of this, when I had you in 8th grade, I probably pulled out my childhood barn and barn animals and gave you the examples here. In a capitalist society, if you are a farmer, you have 2 cows, 2 females, 2 heifers. To make more money, the farmer sells 1 heifer, buys a bull. The heifer and the bull reproduce, making as many cows as the farmer wants. Thus, the farmer is free to produce as many cows for milking or for butchering as he or she sees fit. The farmer is able to make as much money off of milking however many cows or butchering how many cows he has. It is totally his choice. He sets the price for his milk. He sets the price for his cow's beef. People make the choice on whether to buy it. Again, zero involvement from the government. Socialism is a touch different. Okay. And again, you don't need to write these down. It's just to more or less make sure that we're all on the same page. In a socialist system, there is still private business. There is still private ownership, and people still get to make decisions on how much they want to pay for something and how much they want to buy. But the difference with socialism in regards to capitalism is that the government does regulate some things. There is economic regulation controlled by the government, and usually this comes through taxes. All right. So again, if we go back to the example that I would have given in 8th grade, a farmer has 2 heifers. The farmer loses 1 heifer because the government takes it, and the government takes that heifer and gives it to his neighbor. That way, both the original farmer and the neighbor have the ability to produce beef or to produce milk. right? The farmer's ability to make money off of his cows is now limited. Now, in the real world, is the government coming in and taking people's dogs or cats or beef or sorry, cows or goats or chickens? No, right? It's done through taxes. In a socialist society, a socialist economic system, there's still private ownership and business, but the government does regulate businesses, industries, and it usually does it through taxes. Last one is communism, right? And this is what Russia will become. Russia will become a communist system. We've already talked about communism and who it appeals to. Communism appeals to those who are poor, those who are oppressed, because it promises them something. Communism is a political or economic system where all property, all industry, all business is controlled by the government. And what is produced by that industry, company, what have you, is equally shared amongst the people. So again, if we go back and look at the example of our farmer from 8th grade, a farmer had 2 heifers. The government came and took both of his cows, and the farmer and whomever else in that society receive an equal amount of milk and or beef from the government. There is no ownership. There is no profit, excuse me. There's no inequality. This is what Russia will switch to. Russia will switch to this system because of all of the problems that were happening under the Romanov families. These slides you need to start writing down. Okay, the communist philosophy is going to come from a guy named Karl Marx. Karl Marx was a German. Okay, Karl Marx lived in the 19th century, just prior to this time period. All right, he argued that there would be a revolution that takes over the world because there were so few wealthy people in the world, but those few wealthy people in the world controlled all of society. They controlled all of the wealth, while a majority of the people were poor. Right? This is a conflict, and we talked about it earlier in the year, depending if you had me. This is this conflict between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. The bourgeois, or what you people would refer to as bougie, the wealthy, the fancy, all right, control industry, control wealth, control power, and there's very few of them. They do not share it. Because of this oppression and denial of equality with the poor, the proletariat would, in Karl Marx's philosophy, revolt, rebel against the few powerful and wealthy, take over society, and equally distribute everything that society has. This is exactly what happens in Russia. Let's look at why. Okay. We talked about this previously. Russia is the last country that still runs a feudal system. They are the last country that everything is controlled by the king. The king bribes the nobility with land. The nobility controls the land by owning serfs. The serfs produce and work the land for agricultural product. They've followed this system for 1,000 years. It's literally been existent since the end of the Roman Empire. A majority of people, most of people, we're talking like 99% of the Russian population have no wealth, have no money, have no means to improve their life, while 1% or 2% live lavishly for doing nothing, for having the right name, for having the right family. The Romanovs ruled Russia autocratically. They had, zero check on their power. They could do as they wish, because wealth was so controlled by a handful of people. People started to push back, and the pushback caused more problems for Russia. Right? We've already talked about how Alexander II was assassinated, and this led to Alexander III and Nicholas II to be very harsh, very strict, oppressive of any sort of political pushback. This political instability in Russia continues to grow as we move into the 20th century. As more and more countries industrialize and mechanize and mobilize, Russia is stuck. Right? They just got out of feudalism, where they were more or less producing agricultural product, which every country around the world can produce themselves, and because of technology can produce it relatively quickly, cheaply, and efficiently. Russia is transitioning from agriculture to industrial, but they're so far behind, they don't have any labor. And even though they free the serfs to get labor, nothing improves for the people. Technological advancement, industrial advancement in the United States led to the improvement of people's lives in our country, but it didn't there. So the people that live in Russia basically gone from, again, like we talked about in the previous unit, they've gone from a awful living condition in feudalism to an awful living condition in industrialism, while the same people who had all the wealth and power before are the same people who continue to get wealthier and more powerful. That economic condition, that social condition that they've been living in for centuries now gets compounded because they get absolutely hammered when they go to war versus other countries. They get hammered by the Ottomans, they'll get hammered by the Japanese, and they'll get hammered in World War I. It's the losing of these wars, it's the having to fight in these wars and be killed in these wars, on top of the awful economic and political status that these people live in. That's what causes the Russian Revolution to happen. That's what causes them to switch from a monarchy and or capitalist type government system to a communist one. The major leaders of the revolution will be the Bolsheviks. This will become the Communist Party. These are radical revolutionaries that want to overthrow the monarchy and replace it with a people's communist party. Again, the Russian government, the Russian Romanovs are weakened by their losses in the Japanese War, their loss of territory throughout Asia. Okay. The first gain that some of these radicals will have, the first action that some of these radicals will have will come during Bloody Sunday in 1905. Again, this is where the people, we've talked about this is where the people are frustrated with their conditions at home and what they're being subjected to, because it is while in war, because it's not the wealthy folk, it's not the royalty, it's not the nobility who is carrying out these wars, it's the poor folk, right? It's the former peasants. Again, Nicholas II adds a Duma, he adds a legislature, but they have no power, they have no real control or influence over what goes on. World War I, it's more of the same, but it's the final straw. It is constant military disaster, one after the other. You can see in the map down here in the bottom that the Germans are able to advance significantly into Russia. It's the loss, it's the invasion of the Germans that will finally push Russia to the brink. The same people that are involved in the 1905 revolution are going to be the same people that lead the March Revolution in 1917. Starts with the people who are frustrated economically, socially, and politically with what's going on with this war. In the March Revolution, the king is overthrown. The Romanovs are more or less held in prison for the remainder of their lives before they're more or less shot to death in October. Well, their October, our November. Another story for another time. The Russian government is replaced by a provisional government. The provisional government is led by a guy named Alexander Kerensky, excuse me. But the problem is the Russians continue to fight. This provisional government continues to have the Russian army participate in World War I. This is problematic because, again, nothing has changed in Russia. These people are poor. These people are without opportunity. These people are without the ability to improve their lives, and they're fighting people that they have no interest in fighting for a cause that they have no interest in fighting for, right? Why do they care if they're united with the Serbians or the other Slavic people of the Baltic region? Their life is horrendous. What does it matter? What does it matter if there's more people who have a horrendous life? Because Kerensky and the provisional government doesn't do anything to improve the lives of Russians, another revolution happens, this time in October. It's technically in November in our calendar. They run a different calendar for a time period, so it's the October Revolution. It's in the October Revolution that the radical Bolsheviks will come to power, right? There was two groups, the Bolsheviks, radicals. The Mensheviks were, and they're both socialists, right? But the Mensheviks were more not modern, moderate is the word I wanted. But because Kerensky doesn't do anything to help the Russian people, there is another revolution. The Bolsheviks will take power. Lenin more or less campaigns and wins the people over with promising them peace, land, and bread. He gives them everything that they don't have. He gets them out of World War I. He gives them land so they can farm and improve their lives, and he gives them food because they don't have any. The Bolsheviks will take control of the country. They'll get out of World War I. The end of World War I for the Russians begins with the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. It does cost Russia some land, right? They give up Ukraine, they give up Poland and the Baltic states, they give up Finland, but it gets them out of the war. It allows then the Bolsheviks to start paying attention to it allows the Bolsheviks to start trying to pay attention to what the people want, but it's not going to go that easy. There are people who are upset that the Russians lost land. They gave up all of this territory. And if you look at this map of Russia, this is largely where a lot of their food, their breadbasket, their agriculture comes from, because this is the warmer part of Russia. But a civil war ensues. And this is right when the United States gets involved. This is right when, when Woodrow Wilson is talking about fighting for democracy and republicanism. This is what he's talking about, because after the Russians withdraw from World War I, there is a conflict between the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. There's a conflict between the Bolsheviks, who are the radical Red Army, and the Mensheviks, who are the more moderate white Russian army. This conflict will ensue for several years after the conclusion of World War I. But as we know, the Reds, the Bolsheviks win out. Leon Trotsky, delivers a victory to the radicals, and what ensues is, the better part of 70 years of hard communist rule in Russia. Vladimir Lenin will die of a stroke. He'll be replaced by Joseph Stalin, who will more or less kill off any sort of rival to his power, and he'll remain in power for the next 30 years. He'll die in the 1950s. Russia's name will change to the United Soviet Socialist Republics. The Bolsheviks will transition into the People's Communist Party, and the Communist Party will establish a totalitarian state throughout Russia. During the 1920s, during the 1930s, and even into the 1940s, communism will work for the Russians. We've had this conversation in the past that communism doesn't work. Correct. Communism does not work. Communism in the long run does not work. But in the short while, and in the first few years, communism does have some success. People feel empowered and a part of something, and if they put something in, they'll get something out. It's only after a couple of decades that people realize that no matter how hard they work, they don't get anything more. It's after the first decade or two that they realize that they're never going to be more than what the other person is. That's ultimately what will lead to the end of communism. If you look at modern communist countries today, like China or Vietnam, they're not truly communist, but we'll talk about that later. That's the information that I needed to cover with you today. We talked about the causes of the Russian Revolution, why they became communist. Tomorrow we'll pick up with the conclusion of World War I and the 14 points. Wednesday we'll talk about what life was like in Europe after the peace treaty is signed. It's important to notice or to know that it's because of what's going on in Russia that the United States gets involved. It's the overthrow of the government. It's the potential for democracy that brings the U.S. in. And then when there is a civil war between the hardcore communists and those who want a democracy or some sort of democracy during the Civil War, the United States becomes involved because we feel an obligation to protect the democracy. Rest of the day, you guys have questions 35 through 40, so a bit of a shorter reading today on the chapters 27 reading guide. I'll be in the morning tomorrow, so if you're in hours 1 and 2, I will see you. If you're in hours 4, I will undoubtedly not see you. But you'll have another video lecture tomorrow on 4th hour. Remember, the video guide is due Wednesday. Remember, your 8-week deadline is Friday this week at 3:20 p.m., Friday the 13th at 3:20 p.m. Any assignment from last week and prior is subject to that deadline. Any assignment from this week and after will be subject to the end of the year deadline. Hope you all had a great weekend. I hope you celebrated your mother's very well, gave her the attention that she needed. And I'll see you guys on, well, some of you tomorrow and the rest of you on Thursday. Go Spartans.